this computer. Here we go. So welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to do just an hour Zoom on vaccines with my cousin Doug Doucette, who's the Director of Pharmacy for the Horizon Health Network in Moncton, New Brunswick, as well as the past president of the Canadian Society of Hospital Chaplains. And so Doug is going to start off by doing a little presentation on vaccines, on COVID, on that may lead us into asking some questions that we have that we're uncertain about vaccines or COVID or any of those types of follow-up things that we want to hear. So I'm going to put myself on mute, and Doug, thank you so much, and take it away.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to speak with you here tonight, and hopefully I'll have some information that will answer some of the questions you have. So here in New Brunswick, I've been involved leading our vaccine rollout with the Department of Health and with other leaders in our health network in terms of receiving the vaccine into our hospitals, first immunizing healthcare workers, seniors, nursing home residents, and now we're moving out into the community. Just this week, we're down into the 60-year-old grouping out in community. And I'm not all responsible for that one. There's other groups doing that, but our role's been mainly for the hospital workers. And we've learned a lot in the last few months. No stranger to vaccinations. I've been an advocate of immunization throughout my 30-some years in pharmacy. So this has been another very interesting chapter. All right, so I'm going to put up my slides here. Okay, so we should be seeing. Okay, is that showing on your screens there now? Okay. All right, so we'll get rolling here. Okay, so I started off with the poster invite that Jeff put up with the birds. So let's talk about vaccines. All right, so a couple of main things we will get to this evening. Who is at risk for COVID and the variants? What are the benefits and risks of immunization against COVID? And then a much larger block of time at the end for questions you may have about COVID vaccines. So first of all, I can say that like any virus, we're all at risk for being infected with COVID virus. Through our lives, we've probably all had the common cold, which is the signs and symptoms of which are caused by literally a couple hundred different viruses. But COVID-19, there are people who we know over the last year, we've learned people are at greater risk for COVID-19 and its effects. So here, there are a number of people who would be at higher risk of severe outcomes of COVID-19. And that would be to the point where they would need to be hospitalized because they're having breathing or other health problems, or they might even need to go into an intensive care unit. So starting with age groups, the greatest risk is with those 80 and over. And as you move downward to younger ages, the risk falls. And I'll show you another slide on that in a minute. And then you start looking at your major organ systems because it often affects your respiratory system. So people with pre-existing lung disease, your heart and lungs obviously are connected. And if one is having an illness, then the other one has to work that much harder. So people with heart disease are also at higher risk. People with kidney or liver disease, diabetes, dementia or memory problems, as well as any disease or drug that would lower your immune system ability to protect you. People with active cancer, someone who had cancer 5 or 10 years ago and has been cleared, they wouldn't necessarily be in that higher risk group. And then persons who have a large body mass index or are obese may be at higher risk as well. So this is a little busy slide, so I'll just walk you through it. So starting over here on the left side with the age groups, you can see really from 0 all the way down to 50. This is the number of cases with COVID-19 who have been hospitalized as of last week in Canada. This is from Health Canada website. So from 0 to age 50, the incidence of Canadians who have been hospitalized is really quite low, and that's probably not a surprise to you. So the darker blue are males and the lighter blue or gray are females. And as you move from the 50s, 60s and upward, you can see the bars extending off to the right. So when you get into the 70 and 80 plus year old groups, they've been the ones really representing most of our hospitalizations with COVID. Now there's another slide which I don't have in here, but it's on the website, and it shows the current incidence. Like every week they update it. So the number of Canadians, again broken down by age group, who are currently infected with COVID. And this graph you see here is flipped on its head right now, so that those in the 60, 70, and 80 plus year old group, they're representing a very small number of Canadians who are infected with COVID, because we've been able to vaccinate most of them in the provinces now. And what we're seeing is the groups in the 40, 30, and 20-year-old groups, they are representing the largest number of cases in the country right now, in part because they're not vaccinated, and in part because of the variants, which seem to be affecting the younger persons in our country and elsewhere more than the older persons now. So anyway, this just emphasized that our people of higher ages have been more adversely affected by severe outcomes and by hospitalization. So how do you get immunity against COVID-19? Well, we know we are all receiving antibodies which protect us in our immune systems at the time we're born from our mothers. But when we develop active immunity, in the yellow circle over here, you see two main ways. One is natural. So again, if we had the common cold, we can't get infected again from that same virus because your body's developed an immunity to it. So with COVID-19, if you had the infection, you would develop an immunity for some period of time with the antibodies against COVID-19. So that's your natural immunity. And then the artificial immunity would be from the vaccination, of course. So that would give you the protection against COVID-19 that way.
Can you pair up with your phone so I can?
Okay. So I just want to take a sidebar for a minute, because usually this time of year, sort of from November through till March, we would be all about flu, like, friends and neighbors, relatives that are dealing with influenza, maybe they're hospitalized. And one interesting phenomenon we've seen now that we've gone more than a full year in COVID, normally we would see over 12,000 Canadians hospitalized and over 3,000 deaths due to influenza. So I just want to show you quickly in this slide what's happened in the last year, since we've been washing our hands more, staying home, wearing masks, doing all these kinds of things. So starting with this first graph on the left, start with the dotted line. So this starts around about September each year. We can see the number of influenza tests go up. It kind of peaks in December, stays up there until March, April, and then falls back down again. That's the number of tests. And we can see the red line shows the number of influenza tests done in the last year, much greater than normal, in part because what our labs have been doing is when they test for COVID, they test for influenza at the same time with the same sample, just to make sure they're not, treating you for COVID when you actually had influenza. So they want to get the right diagnosis for the symptoms you have. So a lot more testing has been going on in the latter part of 2020 and now into early 2021. Now the interesting part, again, if you were to superimpose those two graphs, the dotted lines would almost be one on top of the other. So in other words, as the number of tests go up, the number of influenza positive tests also go up, and you see that typical mountaintop that we usually see from November to March of every year with flu in our communities. Whoops. And then it falls off again. But you see the red line, it's way down here. There have been almost 0 cases of influenza in Canada this year. And very few, if any, hospitalizations and no outbreaks that I've heard of in the last month or so. So all of the protection that we're doing against COVID has shown us that we've been able to protect against influenza, another, which is caused by another virus, as you know. So this was an interesting finding that that is still developing. So moving on to more direct information about vaccines now. So there are a couple different trackers you can find on the internet. Most of them are, if you look at even two of them on the same day, the numbers will look a little different, and that's simply because of the time of day or the day of the week that they're updated. So the numbers that I'm giving you this evening, these are from the Health Canada one from the end of last week. But if you went on to look at today's, because they updated at the end of every day, we're actually up over to about 10,700,000 doses given as of this afternoon. But as of the end of last week, we're up almost to 10 million, which represents almost 26% of Canadians having at least one dose, and not quite at 1 million yet Canadians have received full vaccination or 2 doses. So the data is changing frequently, but we're basically immunizing about 250,000 to 300,000 Canadians per day right now in April, as the flow of vaccines is picking up of the different kinds we have. And again, now that the supply of vaccine is becoming a little more secure as we get into May and June, we anticipate that any Canadian who wants to be vaccinated should be able to get their first dose by Canada Day. And then by the time they start scheduling the second dose for those tens of millions of Canadians, we probably will be done our second dose rounds by Thanksgiving. So those are kind of the targets that that have been touted a few times by government. Okay, so I'm going to give you a very quick, because you've probably heard different things about the different vaccines and how they work. If you've had flu shots in the past or you had other vaccines, the COVID-19 vaccines we have right now have been produced in a different way than all the other vaccines you would have had in the past. So I'm just going to give you a very brief description of it, because as Jeff mentioned at the start, there's some misinformation out there about how these have been developed, what they do once they're in your body, and you know, all those kinds of things. So I can tell you that both the mRNA and the viral vector vaccines have been in use for a number of years. Not so much in humans. They've both been used for veterinary vaccinations for a number of years. These two technologies have been used for some other vaccines for viruses in humans and some specific cancer therapies. So there, you know, people have thought, oh, this is all new. It's only been developed in the last year and a half. That's not really the case. Particularly the mRNA vaccine, which dates back to the time of the SARS outbreak around 2003. So really, the world has been working on the mRNA vaccine technology for almost 20 years. So every time there was SARS, there was the MERS virus in the Middle East, and more recently Zika. So they've been working on the mRNA approach to that. And then really it's just a matter of once they get the genetic code cracked for the virus, then they can start producing this vaccine. So they can literally turn it around in months. So that does allow it to be produced faster than traditional vaccines, which rely on egg cultures and other types of things, or pardon me, egg embryo. So what the mRNA vaccine does is once it gets into your body, you get your injection, it releases the chemical that goes into your cells, and then it's basically carrying the recipe to make the spike protein for the SARS-CoV-2, or what we call COVID-19, the protein that's on the outside of that virus particle. And that's what your body recognizes as foreign, each one of those little proteins that are on the outside of it. So once your cells start making that protein, that's just the protein itself is inactive, but it serves as a flag for your body to recognize as foreign, and then your immune system can attack it. So it doesn't give you any kind of virus particle or anything like that. It just tells your body, this is the protein I want you to make. This is how you put the chemical together to make it happen. And then they grow the protein, and then once it's done, it dies off. The viral vector works similar, except that In this case, the vaccine uses a type of cold virus, the adenovirus, that's been inactivated. So again, this virus, the harmless virus, gets into your body through the vaccine. It goes to your cell. The same thing as a virus would do is it injects its genetic recipe into your cell and uses it to produce itself. In this case, it's producing that spike protein that is just serving as a target again for your immune system. So it can't give you COVID. It can't even give you the symptoms of COVID. But what you're getting when we talk about side effects, that's your body's immune system attacking these spike proteins that are being produced by your body. So they're similar in that respect. So the mRNA, as you may know, is the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccines, and the viral vector approach was used in the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which it's been approved for use in Canada, but is not yet available. We don't have supplies of it yet. Okay, so a question I've had countless times. If I had a toonie for every time I had this question in person or on Facebook over the last few months, I'd be able to go out and buy myself a nice dinner. So it's a tough question to answer because, as I just explained to you, the four vaccines, two work one way and two work another way. So they work differently in your immune system. The dosing regimens are different as well. So in other words, some of them require 2 doses, some only requires a single dose. And the interval between the 2-dose ones, some of them it's at least 21 days, some of it's 28. The times in the studies that they did, the times to record the symptoms were different as well. So for example, in the Pfizer study, after the second dose, they looked at the symptoms 7 days later, at least 7 days. And in the Moderna and AstraZeneca, it was at least 14 days after. So you're using different measuring sticks. You're using the same symptoms, but you're getting different measuring sticks. And the trials themselves were conducted at different times. So if we were testing a new drug in diabetes, it probably wouldn't matter because, the diabetes is the same whether you're doing it in 2005 or 2015. But what's different is when we started doing the Pfizer and then the Moderna trials, there were relatively low levels of COVID infection around the world. Fast forward even 3 or 4 months, when you're hitting your second, maybe even your third wave in some of the countries where the vaccines were being tested, now they're in some cases going into communities where there's much higher rates of COVID infection and spread. So that might mean that you're going to be more challenged to find patients who haven't already been infected with COVID. Or in some cases, I heard that people got their first vaccine dose, and before that first week or two had passed, when you expect your body to mount that immunity, then they became infected with COVID, even in that period while your body's waiting for the thing to mount. So it kind of muddies the water a little bit just because of the different timing, whether the study was done in the middle of 2020 or the end of 2020, and now there's still a number of trials going on. So the picture here, all this to say, it's not a straight answer. It's like comparing apples and oranges. So we'll get more in general terms about the benefits here. And then before I get into side effects, I'll pause for some questions about what we've talked about so far. So the benefits or the results of the studies. So what would being immunized against COVID vaccine do for you? So first of all, it could prevent you from getting COVID altogether. Or if you do become infected, it may prevent you from becoming seriously ill or dying, maybe needing to go to the hospital, be admitted, go into ICU in terms of seriously ill. And again, the studies have shown that these vaccines will prevent the more serious illness and they prevent death. They lower the risk of death. And it helps from spreading the virus to others, okay? When you look beyond an individual, the more people that we have immunized with COVID vaccine, we move towards what we call herd immunity. So we need 60 to 70% of people in a population to be immunized or have developed immunity from their infection to create an environment that your chance of spreading it's going to be so low now. In other words, if you get 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 people in your neighborhood who have the immunity, there's just too few people now who are unprotected for the virus to spread. I mean, it still can spread, but again, your chances of it spreading are much lower at that point. So the virus could just die out at that point. So that's the herd immunity concept. And again, by limiting the spread, we're limiting the chance of the virus mutating, because that's when things really take off. The more surge or spikes in cases we have, that's what really fuels the ability of the virus to mutate and cause all these variants that we're hearing about. Over on the right, a couple bubbles here. First of all, there are a number of groups that are not well represented in the studies yet. So most of the trials in the vaccines we're using now, were in 16 or 18-year-old and up. So we know that our kids and adolescents and pregnant women were not studied in the first round of trials. And that's not unusual for vaccines or for other pharmaceuticals. But there are trials ongoing right now with a couple of the vaccines in these age groups. So we should have some answers very shortly. And they're also testing either in clinical trials or in sort of real world data on how well the vaccine is doing against the variants that are circulating out there now. So we're learning from that as well. Okay, so again, you've probably heard back to which the best one to take. You know, if you've been reading in the media, Pfizer, Moderna, we're touting ours is 94, 95% effective. As I said, whether it's measured at 1 week or 2 weeks after the booster dose. And in, since now, each of those trials were in like 30, 40,000 patients, but now we have literally given the vaccine to tens of millions of people around the world, those 2 vaccines. And we know that after 1 dose, we get 80% protection. The second dose boosts you up to that high 90% rate. Now, as I said, the AstraZeneca and the J&J were studied several months later. So although their numbers look really, quite a bit lower in the 60 to 70%, again, they were working in a different environment. That's not to say they're not as good as the mRNA vaccines, because even in the trials of the viral vector vaccines, they were highly effective at preventing hospitalization in the thousands of subjects they studied, and in death as well. So that was common between all 4 vaccines. So for me, the bottom line message is the vaccines are safe and effective, all of the ones we have available. In terms of what you may have heard about, these studies were all rushed, or they were shortcuts and things like that. As I said, the studies had tens of thousands of subjects in each study, which is better than what we've seen for most other vaccines in the past. A group had the vaccine and a group didn't have the vaccine. They basically got salt water or a pretend vaccine, so they could compare them. All those subjects were followed. They did proper analysis for is this vaccine working or not, and how safe is it? So there were no corners cut. What was done differently is that people really came together in a collaborative way and worked on these trials with a real urgency for it. And companies that might have been and scientists that would have been competing before were all now working together on it. So they were able to sort of harness all their energies on this. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions up to this point before we start getting into talking the side effects. So if you have a question, you can just unmute.
Okay, I have a question
Okay.
just about your last slide, and you're talking about double-blind trials. And I'm just wondering the ethics of that. Maybe this is more for Jeff, I'm not sure, but like, to me, if you're in the middle of a pandemic and you're offering to try a drug out, and you may end up with, I think you said saline solution or whatever, rather
Yeah.
than the drug.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you feel about that? From a science point of view, I could see how you'd want to do that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's no, there's an ethical situation there potentially, but on the other hand, if we only gave the vaccine and we didn't have a comparator group, we didn't have the ability to randomize, then there'd always be that question, you know, well, how did you select the patients who had the vaccine? So it would be similar, you know, for studying a cancer therapy, for studying the only, shouldn't say the only one, but a common exception, I would see if you knew someone had an infection that was going to kill them, like pneumonia, it still has a pretty high prevalence of bad outcomes that way, then that would clearly be unethical to not give them some kind of, so in those cases, it's more active. We're going to give them the standard antibiotic against the new one we're trying to test. So we wouldn't give placebo in that kind of situation.
okay.
In this one, it was more a matter that the mortality rate, and you know, I can't say I'm an ethicist, but I would say probably the rationale was that the mortality was still relatively low, higher than the normal influenza kind of virus, but lower than some of the more virulent strains like Ebola or something like that, where you're looking at 30% mortality for someone who acquires an infection from that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Okay.
While we have the mic, you talked about an egg embryo being used.
Mhm.
An egg from where?
Chicken.
Chicken?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a lot of the vaccines that are used. They start them in the culture with an egg embryo or an egg culture. Yeah, and that's why they have to grow them to a certain number, and then they can get harvest from that and then produce from there. That is not the technology used in any of the vaccines so far developed for COVID, though. But some of our more common core vaccines that we would use in our core immunizations may be using that kind of technology.
Okay, because I know there was some talk from some circles, oh, it's with aborted fetuses, and I was like, nah,
Yeah.
I don't think so. So
No.
nice to, thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, anyone else?
Good question.
sure.
You've talked about there being almost no flu this year. I teach kindergarten, and I certainly noticed that. Do you think, obviously the learning from this is that all this protocol and hand washing has definitely made things much improved.
Mhm.
Do you feel because of that, their immune system to the flu in the future will not be the same because they've not been exposed?
Ah, good question. Hadn't thought of it that way. I'm not sure.
I
I'm
know
not sure.
myself that,
Yeah.
you know, my two hardest years of teaching young kids were after I'd been off having maternity leave,
Mhm.
because I had taken a year off, and I don't know that it's true, but
Yeah.
I made the assumption that part of that would be that I wasn't there and exposed to the virus the
Yeah.
same. Also, having young children in daycare would
Yeah.
definitely improve or increase your
Yeah.
chance of getting sick.
Yeah.
But I just was curious if that we could see in the future that could end up going up simply because we haven't been exposed to it now.
Yeah, I guess what I would say to that, and I was just reading something on this week, thinking about what may be some of the health and social sort of flashback after COVID. Like you say, when we remove our masks and start mingling closer together again, there could be a bit of a spike in some respiratory diseases, whether it's because, I don't know that it's because our immune system, you know, hasn't kept up, but now all of a sudden we're probably going to be exposed to things we haven't been before. So not really a sterile environment, but a sort of a cloistered kind of environment that we're in now, living behind a mask and in rooms by ourselves most of the day. And then we're back out playing in the dirty world, you know, so yeah, it could be coming to that again. And like you said, with school moving to a new work or school environment. That's typically what we see is when people enter that new germ pool, then they come down with various respiratory and gastro infections and things like that because they're now picking that up. So they can keep doing what they've been doing in terms of frequent hand washing, you know, making sure to sanitize objects from time to time, and that may help. So
Yeah, I don't think I'll be giving up hand washing just because we lose our masks anytime soon.
yeah,
It's made
for
a big
sure.
difference.
For sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's carry on then. So some of the risks or side effects from the vaccines. As with most vaccines, the most common one you'll see is pain, redness, and swelling at the injection site where it goes in, whether it's, you know, regardless of the volume of fluid that goes in. That's typically what you're going to see because it's usually going into a muscle. The rest of the symptoms you see on this page here are not related to the injection, like the needle itself, but it's related to your body's immune response. So when you get fever, chills, if you're feeling tired, pain in your muscles, joints, upset stomach, those kinds of things, that's all related to your body's immune response. And if you've ever had the flu or a severe viral illness, you may have had some of those symptoms as well. And again, it's typically your body attacking that virus that's seen as foreign to your body. So with all the vaccines that we're talking about here tonight, most of the side effects are in this category mild. Some people won't have anything below the site pain. They'll just have the, you know, a little bit of tenderness at the injection site. You usually see it 1 to 3 days after your injection, either your first or your second, and usually within a couple of days, all of those will reside and you'll feel yourself again after that. So that's what we're seeing, anywhere from like 20 to 80, 90% of people who receive the vaccine. It does vary. I've talked to some people, they've had 0, talked to other people, it's like feeling kind of tired and achy for a couple of days, and then all's good after that. Then there's a more serious or severe kinds of side effects. So the one that we always watch for with any kind of vaccination is an allergic reaction. So that's why you're asked to wait for 15 minutes at least after your shot to make sure that there's nothing immediate that's going to occur. And that's something we do with again, after first or second dose with any vaccine that's given. I wanted to speak tonight because I know the buzz in the news the last few weeks is about blood clots with the vaccine. So I did include a bit more information here on the blood clots to give you a perspective on that. So first of all, most of the news we're seeing are from the reactions, or the reports, I should say, with AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, whether it's coming from Canada or other parts of the world, because these vaccines are being used everywhere. Currently, just yesterday in Canada, we had our 3rd case reported. So we now have 1 case of blood clots due to a low platelet count in Alberta, 1 in Quebec, and 1 in New Brunswick. The European Medicines Agency reviewed about 18 cases a couple of weeks ago. And I didn't get the number for the States, but the FDA has some cases down there they're reviewing. In none of the reviews that I've heard yet have the authorities or the experts say, we can't say that the vaccine didn't cause this or is not associated with the reaction. However, the fact that the numbers are still very low was cause enough for them to pause to look at the information more closely. But and that was, if you heard in the last couple of weeks, they did limit the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine in Canada to those 55 and older, because most of the cases we've seen worldwide are in the younger folks, 55 and under, primarily women. So now they've done another analysis just earlier this week, and some provinces now are opening up to 40 and above, because they feel that it's, again, the risk is very small going forward. So perspective for you is that the number of cases that have been reported against the number of total doses of the vaccines out there, it means for every 1 million persons who receive the vaccine, we're getting 4 to 5 cases of these blood clots with low platelet counts. If you didn't have the vaccine, but you got COVID, you'd be looking at about a 10 times higher risk of getting some type of clotting disorder or clotting symptoms. So, you know, they're not exactly the same, but you could get something that's considered pretty similar from the infection or potentially related to the vaccine. So the bottom line is, you know, the reports of blood clots, you know, in someone who's had the vaccine is considered very rare. You know, literally on the order of 1 per 100,000 to 1 in a million. And then in the box at the bottom here, there are other conditions or medications that are associated with a much higher risk of blood clots than these vaccines at this point. So women carrying pregnancy are at higher risk. If you're sitting in a car or an airplane for several hours of travel, you have a higher risk of blood clot than if you're just moving around every day. Smokers, people taking hormone therapy and oral contraceptives all have much higher risks of blood clots than what we're seeing at the level here of 4 to 5 per million. So that's perspective for you. The other thing I discovered this week is looking into the Pfizer, just for fun, I checked out all the vaccines. There's a similar number of cases of Pfizer vaccine causing blood clots, but it just didn't hit the radar at the time because Pfizer was the only one around, and the reports of serious effects in the first couple months of Pfizer use, you know, they were so low that it didn't even cause a blink in any of the regulatory bodies. So their case count is slightly lower of blood clots than AstraZeneca, but again, it's really not registered. So one interpretation could be that it's almost by chance that it's happening. Another one could be that no, it is associated with the vaccine somehow and your body's reaction to it, but it's still so low that we just need to leave it up to the individual as to whether or not they want to have that risk of taking the vaccine. So that was a lot to put out there for you, but I just wanted to give you that perspective because as I've read some of the media reports over the last couple of weeks, they haven't always given that kind of perspective. Okay, so now you're vaccinated. Now what do you do? Well, I think we've been hearing from our chief medical officers that probably for the time being, we're going to need to continue hand washing, distancing, limiting our gathering size depending on what your alert phase is like in your area, and wearing masks because the variants, you know, we're not dealing with the wild type COVID strain that landed on our shores in early 2000. The viruses are mutating, and some of them are much more easy to spread, and they can cause more severe illness than the initial strain of the vaccine, pardon me, of the virus that we saw before. So the other thing is we don't know once you're vaccinated yet because the studies are still pretty short. There's ongoing follow-up for up to 2 years for the people who are in those studies, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, et cetera. But until we get a little further down the road, we don't know how long our antibodies within our immune system, once we've been vaccinated, will be effective against the virus. So that's why for now, we're still going to have a collection of masks in our pocket. So I've also included a few of the common websites here. You may have some others that you visited over time, and there's certainly a lot of them out there, but these are some of the more standard ones. Health Canada, Centers for Disease Control in the US, and Mayo Clinic is probably more popular one from one of the United States healthcare organizations. So I'll open it back up for questions.
Do you want to
Hi.
maybe unshare unshare the screen, Doug?
Here we go.
Oh, there, we'll bring everybody back up. There we go. I can see everybody.
Okay, I have a question again.
Okay.
We have a son in Germany, and in conversation with him, he was mentioning that there's a thought now that with the Pfizer vaccine, you won't need just one booster shot, but you're going to need two. Have you heard
Yeah.
that, and how factual is that?
That's a very early information that the companies are looking into. And the booster that they're talking about, so you get your initial shot, you get your second shot. So what they're talking about is there would be a booster to the booster, or essentially a third shot in some cases that will be more, it probably won't be the same as the strain they're making now. It's probably going to be more targeting to cover some of the existing variants that we're dealing with. So it'll be a bit more dialed in that way. So what they're describing sounds to me very much like what we do with our annual flu vaccine.
Yeah.
So we typically have 3 or 4 strains. We see what's going on down in Australia and Southeast Asia when they hit their summer flu season. And then, you know, the scientists put together, oh, these are the ones we should be worrying about. And these are the 3 or 4 we should have in our vaccine in the Western world for the flu season that comes up. So there, because of the mRNA technology, they should be able to turn that around fairly quickly. So yeah, that's something they're just starting to talk about now. So could we see it by the end of this year? Possibly, yeah.
Okay,
The other thing I've heard related to that is, and this is a prediction, is that our future annual flu shots may have some kind of COVID strain protection in there as well. So we may not need 2 shots. It could be part of that single vaccine that we get down the road.
like it.
Still too early to say for sure, but that's some of the things I've been reading.
I have a question. Sorry. Regarding the side effects, I got the Pfizer shot, and when I got it, like I didn't have any side effects at all. Like it was great. I felt a little fatigued, but that was all. But when I received it, the doctor that gave it to me had said, okay, we were talking about possible side effects, and he says, now with your second one, he said, you may feel differently, like you may, the side effects may be more severe. Why is that? I would have thought that if I was going to get a side effects, I would get it with the first shot.
Yeah. Part of it's almost like your, the way I've heard it explained is your immune system is like warming up. So the first time it's like, oh, there's that little spike protein, we'll attack it, you mount that response. But the next time it's like, oh, you're back now, and they hit it hard. That's a very simplistic response, but that's what I've been hearing, not just for the Pfizer vaccine, but for some of the other ones too. The second dose seems to, in some patients, not everyone, they seem to say, oh, I was a little fatigued before, I'm down for a full day, maybe the next time, or, I had a lot more muscle pain the second time around. I'm not hearing that uniformly, but I'm definitely hearing consistently that they're getting more the second dose than they did for the first.
Okay, thank you.
I can ask a question as well.
Okay.
I was fortunate enough to get the Pfizer first dose on April 1st, and I'm a regular blood donor, so I'm used to big needles going into my arm. Whereas when the doctor gave me this, she said, that's it, we're done. And it was just a little pinprick.
Yep.
But when I look at how the needle goes in, I see it's a thin needle, but they put it in quite a distance.
Yeah.
So my question is, like, why wouldn't they put it into your vein versus way deep into your muscle? Like, what's the thought behind that?
Well, the idea is you want it to be, you want your body to be able to get to it and then get at it over time. So most immunizations are given in the muscle for that reason. So if it's in the blood, it could actually be broken down and cleared more quickly. So it gets in your muscle, it's sort of like a station for your immune system to attack it. and go from there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, but you're right. The needles are very thin.
Mhm.
You know, usually, I think we were using 1/2 inch in most of our patients, and we have the ability to change the needle length as well. So for someone who's, you know, frail, maybe not a lot of body tissue, we can use a shorter needle. If someone has a bit more fat tissue or they're more muscly, then we might use a longer needle to make sure we're getting into that muscle deep enough to get a good shot.
I have a question. Just based on the AstraZeneca and the effectiveness, even after your second dosage, is there talk about maybe having a booster for that one so that you have 100%?
I think
Or
they're
maybe I read the
looking.
slide wrong, because it seems like after you've had your second needle, it didn't say you had 100% protection.
No, none of them have, at the time they did the study, say that you have 100% protection. And in fact, you know, back over a year ago when the World Health Organization and CDC, you know, when they were saying, what's our ideal vaccine going to do for us? They said, you know, if we can get, and this is based on the kind of response we see from other illnesses that we vaccinate for now, they said, you know, when we're developing a vaccine, if it doesn't have at least 50% protection after your second dose or first dose, if it's only a single dose, then it's probably not going to be any good. So certainly when Pfizer Moderna came out to say after our second dose, we were at 94, 95, like people were over the moon about that. And it almost stole the thunder from AstraZeneca and J&J when they came out to say, oh, we're at 75, we're at 66. That's still well above 60, well above 50. So it's above that bar that the World Health Organization set. And the idea isn't necessarily that we're going to reach 100% because of all the factors involved.
Well, even just increase it, increase that percentage I think is what I'm thinking.
It's a bit of a numbers game too. So it doesn't mean that you get 100% protection. So when they say 94%, it's like 94% of the people who received the vaccine didn't get symptoms. So that's the 94% part.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Now, obviously, if 100% who got the vaccine didn't get symptoms, that'd be even better. But you know, even from what WHO was saying, like to get 2/3 or 3/4 of your people who get a vaccine who don't get symptoms from it, that's great, because even, you know, the 25% of them who got symptoms, you know, none of them went to the hospital. They didn't get sick enough to go to the hospital, and none of those patients in that study died too. I mean, we're talking about 25, 35,000 patients. So it's still highly effective even at 65 to 75%. But yeah, 100 would be great if we could get everyone there.
Thank you.
Okay.
There was a comment. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, there was a comment made by somebody earlier about hand washing and preventing infections through that.
Mhm.
But before COVID-19 even showed up, I had heard people saying that all the hand washing and soaps and disinfectants that we use
Mhm.
are creating a whole new world of drug resistant or more resistant infections. So what do you think might be the outcome of what we're doing right now, which seems helpful, but in the long term, is it going to get?
No, you're absolutely right. And this is not new. Advocates and scientists have been saying for a couple of decades, and we see it in the marketing, right? The antibacterial soap, you know, and shower gels and things like that. There's no real benefit to having antibacterial, like a chemical in there to kill additional bacteria on our skin, you know, because we're going to have bacteria on our skin regardless. And some of them are there for good purpose. It's like any kind of bacteria or virus. Our bodies are designed to deal with those foreign things. And some of them have good properties within our gut, for example, within some of our airways. Some of those flora that are in there serve a purpose. The use of like an alcohol gel without an additional antibacterial ingredient is probably the best way to go, because the chance of a virus or the common bacteria that we would have on our hands developing resistance to alcohol would be pretty slim, because the alcohol just breaks down their cell walls and they die, and that's that. But it's when you start when we start using antibiotics or antibacterial chemicals, whether it be through a therapy or through soaps and other things. Well, these organisms have been around for literally millions of years, and it only took a short period of time after penicillin was introduced in the early 1900s for resistance to start showing. So their machinery within these simple organisms might seem really simple, but it's also very effective, and that's why they can develop that resistance. So, it's by putting the antibacterial products or chemicals within these products, yeah, we are driving some antimicrobial resistance, definitely.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
I have two daughters that are 17 and 19. So I'm just kind of curious, as I know you mentioned that they're starting to do studies. If you have an idea of when they might be able to be vaccinated, or how low vaccinations will go in age. And the second part is, my one daughter and I went to a virtual open house tonight at a college, and just looking ahead for the future, and they're hoping to have a lot more hands-on in-person learning in the fall, based on what they're hearing health-wise from the powers that be. I'm just curious what your prediction would be, if you think that because of vaccinations that will be the case.
Okay, so to your first question, all of the vaccines right now are indicated for use in adults 18 and older. Pfizer was 16 and older. So depending on when your daughters could get an appointment, the older one should be able, once the window opens for people in her age group, she should be able to get whichever one she could get. And your younger daughter, if the Pfizer is made available to her, she would be able to receive it based on her age currently.
Okay.
As far as the if she had to wait, I would say, given the speed at which I've seen some of the studies be completed, be reviewed, I'd predict we could see possibility of vaccine use in younger kids, like younger than 16, possibly later this year, early next year. And then your other question about, opening up our communities. I know that's certainly what schools and businesses are hoping for. Like you may still have to be physically distanced within your classroom, within your lab, those kinds of things. But if you knew that everyone in that room had been vaccinated, they're probably still going to have to wear a mask. That would be my guess at this point. But I know a lot of organizations and institutions are starting to look at how do we swivel back closer to what we were doing before with in-person work, in-person learning, maybe more visits within a business or things like that. So that's going to be, in my view, probably overseen by the authorities. So in the same way, when we buckled things down through the various COVID plans we had, whether it was a school, a business, a hospital, whatever, a church, we're going to need to revise those plans and put them forward for approval to say, yes, we're opening it up, in stages or whatever, and you'll need to have your plan to deal with what happens if you get an exposure of someone who was the same way you do now. So you probably still have that, you'll need to have that ability to step back, you know, deal with an exposure or things like that. That'd be my guess on how things might go. We've been talking about it in healthcare as well. My daughter is an elementary school teacher, so I know that she's also wondering what, not so much the rest of this year, but what next fall could look like when they return to school.
I was just surprised. They were pretty confident that how things would be so much better, and I'm hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah, if
Okay.
the game changer is probably going to be the variants. You know, if I think the vaccines are one thing. There's some limited success with depending on the vaccine and the variant. I don't think we've seen a vaccine yet that gives you perfect coverage against all the variants yet, and there's still new variants coming forward. So as I said in the presentation, if we can contain the spread of the virus, that also limits the ability of the variants to be created and grow from there. So you know, there's still some hope that will, you know, sort of die out, and that would increase our chances of getting to that kind of scenario that you're describing in the school.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I know we have people who keep asking me, so when do you think we'll go back to in person? And I'll just say when everyone has gotten their vaccinations, you know, as much as possible. I know we can't make people get vaccinations. We can strongly encourage people to follow the science, talk to their doctors, and that the sooner that happens, the sooner we will be able, according to the local health units, when we have the permission, to be able to look at following the guidelines of how do we come back to church? How do we begin to, you know, worship in person? What are the things that we are going to be able to do? You know, wearing masks. Can we sing under the masks? You know, all of these different things of communion. You know, when can we have coffee together afterwards again? You know, that's huge at our church. It's a meal. It's not just coffee.
Yeah.
It's a bloody meal. So everyone takes turns. So these are kind of things that we just, you know, we've made the decision as a church board to say we'll go back when pretty well everyone can go back safely. Just it feels strange not to do otherwise. We want people to be safe, and people want to be safe. So, yeah, sooner than later.
Yeah. Any last questions?
Well, I put it in the chat, but thank you to Jeff and to Doug. Doug, especially for taking time out to be with us and to be available. This has been very fascinating and interesting, and I really appreciate it. So Jeff, thanks for thinking of it and organizing it.
Consider it an outreach. So, and I thought by being able to record it, I will upload it to YouTube and then put it out as a link. So folks will be able to watch it at their leisure.
Awesome.
And yeah. So
yeah, and I'll add my thanks as well to Jeff again for inviting me. But for anyone having any doubts about, again, the vaccines, it totally needs to be a personal choice. Personally, I was given the Pfizer vaccine. That's what was given to healthcare workers in our organization. When the time came for my wife to get vaccinated in the community here, she said, okay, they have AstraZeneca at the pharmacy down the road. What do you think? And I said, go. Like, don't wait for the next one. Like, you've got a chance to get in there now and get it today.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So that's my level of confidence I have in the vaccines that are out there.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody
Yes.
so much. I appreciate it. Everyone coming out this evening, and thank you, Doug. Really, really appreciate it. And we'll be chatting again soon. So thanks everybody, and I bid you all a good night.
Good night. Thank you.